The exchange between Karoline Leavitt and Jasmine Crokett began like many others pointed remarks, carefully chosen phrases, and the steady rhythm of back-and-forth debate that characterizes political life. The cameras were rolling, the lights were glaring, and every word spoken was destined to be analyzed, clipped, and shared within minutes. Yet beneath the polished exterior of the proceedings, tension simmered. Both women had been circling each other's arguments with a sharpness that suggested the moment would not pass without something memorable. Karoline, known for her unapologetic tone and refusal to soften her convictions, sat with her notes in hand, though it was clear she wasn't relying on them. She had already made up her mind about the direction of the conversation, and her focus was fixed squarely on Jasmine. Every gesture, every inflection in Jasmine's voice seemed to draw Karoline closer to the edge of her patience. What unfolded was not spontaneous, but calculated. She had been waiting for her chance to interrupt, and when it came, she seized it with precision. The discussion had veered toward the subject of credibility, a theme that always raises the stakes in political discourse. As Jasmine delivered her remarks, weaving together her points with characteristic certainty, Karoline leaned forward slightly, her posture signaling that something was coming. Those around her could sense it. Aides shifted in their seats. Reporters positioned their pens more firmly against their notes. And then, as Jasmine completed her thought, Karoline's voice cut through the air. "You're finished," she declared. The words were sharp, deliberate, and final. She did not stutter or hesitate. She did not cushion the statement with context or qualification. Instead, she allowed the weight of those two words to carry everything she intended to express. In that moment, the chamber grew still. Conversations hushed, and even those accustomed to fiery exchanges looked up, startled by the bluntness of her tone. Karoline's expression confirmed she meant exactly what she had said. This was no slip of the tongue, no passing remark. It was a verdict, spoken with the confidence of someone convinced she had seized control of the narrative. The impact of her words was amplified by who she was and what she represented. Karoline had built her reputation on directness, often admired by her supporters for saying what others might only hint at. Critics, however, saw the same qualities as a lack of restraint, an eagerness to confront rather than persuade. In either case, she commanded attention. And when she told Jasmine, "You're finished," she was speaking not only to her opponent but to everyone listening, the colleagues in the room, the viewers at home, and yes, even him. The weight of her words seemed directed toward the larger stage of politics, where every statement can echo far beyond the moment. Karoline's timing added to the force of her statement. She did not interject mid-sentence, as some might win, eager to disrupt an argument. She waited, allowing Jasmine to conclude, before striking with her own remark. This made the declaration appear not impulsive, but deliberate. It was as though she had considered every word spoken before dismissing it all with two words. The strategy was clear. She wanted her statement to not just interrupt, but to end. Observers reacted in varied ways. Some nodded in agreement, silently affirming Karoline's confidence. Others frowned, sensing that her words carried a tone that might be seen as overly aggressive. But none could deny the effect. Reporters immediately began scribbling, already certain that the phrase would headline articles and ignite discussion online. Karoline had succeeded in shifting the focus. Her tone carried the authority of someone who understood the moment. She knew that saying "you're finished" wasn't simply about the immediate debate. It was about planting a phrase that would linger, one that could be replayed and dissected repeatedly. She had taken control of the conversation in fewer words than most used to begin their arguments. And while reactions to her remark varied, one thing was undeniable. Karoline had once again demonstrated her ability to command attention with brevity and boldness. She had turned a routine exchange into a defining moment, one where her words seemed to echo louder than the arguments that had come before. When Karoline Leavitt's words cut across the room, "You're finished," many expected Jasmine Crokett to fire back with the same level of intensity. The natural instinct in such situations is to mirror the tone, to meet sharpness with sharper edges, to raise one's voice so that no one mistakes silence for weakness. Yet Jasmine chose an entirely different path. She paused, as though giving the words space to settle, and then a faint smile appeared at the corner of her lips. It wasn't the smile of someone dismissing what had been said, nor was it mocking. It carried a steadiness, a signal that she was prepared to answer, but on her terms, not anyone else's. For a brief moment, the chamber felt suspended, as if everyone was waiting to see whether the exchange would escalate into a shouting match. Instead, Jasmine leaned slightly toward the microphone and began to speak in a calm, measured tone that contrasted sharply with the fiery declaration that had preceded it. Her words weren't rushed. She paced herself, making it clear that she wouldn't be dragged into the storm. Where Karoline had offered finality, Jasmine countered with composure. The choice to respond with calmness was strategic. In politics, tone can matter as much as substance. By speaking without anger, Jasmine shifted the energy of the exchange. She redirected the conversation from confrontation to reflection, and in doing so, she seized attention just as powerfully as Karoline had with her bold declaration. Viewers watching from home could sense the difference. It was not just what she said but how she said it that made people stop and listen. Asterisk. Her reply acknowledged the charge leveled at her, but she reframed it in a way that expanded the discussion beyond personal conflict. She spoke of accountability, of the need for leaders to stand not just on words but on actions. Her tone suggested that being finished wasn't defined by a rival's declaration but by the trust of the people, by whether one delivered on promises made. And when she said it, she made sure to emphasize that true judgment came not from a single statement across the table but from those who elected leaders in the first place, including him. The reference added a subtle weight, reminding everyone that the conversation was bigger than personalities or politics. He touched on the broader expectations of leadership in the nation's highest arenas. Asterisk. The room grew unusually quiet as she continued. By not raising her voice, she commanded it. Those listening leaned forward, not because they were being shouted at, but because her calmness made them want to catch every word. Even those who disagreed with her had to admit that the poise with which she responded stood in sharp contrast to the heat of the moment. It was the type of reply that didn't just deflect an accusation but redefined the context of the debate altogether. Asterisk. Observers later noted that her composure seemed to disarm the situation. Karoline's words had been meant to end the conversation, to assert control with sharp finality, but Jasmine's measured response reopened it, pulling the narrative in a direction no one expected. The contrast was striking. Where one voice declared an ending, the other introduced perspective. It was a reminder that sometimes the loudest statement is made not through volume, but through restraint. Asterisk. Her supporters saw in that moment a demonstration of leadership. They argued that anyone can raise their voice in the heat of debate, but it takes discipline to answer force with calm resolve. Critics, too, found themselves acknowledging the effectiveness of her reply, even if they disagreed with her politics. And across the nation, the exchange sparked conversation not only about what was said, but about how it was said. Asterisk. Jasmine's response also carried a subtle undertone and insistence that politics is ultimately about service, not spectacle. By redirecting the conversation toward responsibility, she reminded both her colleagues and the public that leadership is tested in moments of pressure. Mentioning him in her framing made the point even sharper, that accountability reaches the highest levels, and that no one, regardless of position, escapes the scrutiny of those they serve. Asterisk. The contrast between Karoline's fiery words and Jasmine's calm reply lingered long after the microphones were turned off. It wasn't a typical clash filled with overlapping voices and interruptions. Instead, it became an exchange that revealed how tone itself could define perception. Karoline had spoken with sharpness. Jasmine had answered with composure. And together, those two choices created a moment that stood out. Not because of the drama, but because of the unexpected balance between confrontation and calm. Asterisk. When Jasmine Crokett began her reply, what surprised people wasn't only her composure, but the direction she chose to take it. She could have easily responded with a personal retort, trading sharp words for sharp words. Instead, she shifted the focus away from herself and onto principles that mattered beyond a single exchange. Her words became less about defending her own position, and more about setting a tone for what leadership should look like. She emphasized accountability, respect, and the weight of responsibility that comes with holding public office. By doing this, she not only diffused the tension but also reframed the entire conversation. Asterisk. She spoke about accountability first, making it clear that leadership is not measured by who can speak the loudest or who can shut down an opponent with the sharpest phrase. True accountability, she reminded the room, comes from action, keeping promises, representing communities with integrity, and being transparent when mistakes are made. Her words landed differently because they weren't an attack. They were a challenge, not just to Karoline but to everyone listening, including him. It was a reminder that those who sit in positions of power are ultimately answerable to the public, and no single outburst or headline can erase that responsibility. Asterisk. Then she touched on respect, weaving it into the fabric of her reply with deliberate calmness. In her view, respect wasn't about liking one another or agreeing on every issue. It was about acknowledging that even in disagreement, there is value in listening. Respect, she argued, is what allows debate to be productive rather than destructive. Her words carried weight because they spoke to something larger than the moment they hinted at the health of the political process itself. By refusing to escalate the confrontation, she demonstrated the very respect she was describing, a choice that did not go unnoticed by those in the room. Asterisk. From there, Jasmine moved to responsibility, arguably the most powerful theme of her message. She framed leadership not as a stage for personal victories, but as a duty to the people who placed their trust in elected officials. She said that every decision, every vote, and every word spoken in chambers like these carried consequences beyond the walls of government. And when she said this, she anchored the point by mentioning him, reminding everyone that even those at the very top are bound by the same measure of responsibility. In doing so, she linked the exchange to a broader truth, that no leader is exempt from the scrutiny of the people, and no leader can dismiss accountability simply by declaring someone else finished. The room seemed to absorb her words with a silence that spoke volumes. Reporters who had initially braced for a shouting match now found themselves scribbling down a reply that was far more measured, but perhaps even more impactful. Some members of the audience nodded slowly, as though acknowledging the sense behind her statements. Others leaned back, surprised that she had taken the higher ground instead of meeting fire with fire. It was not the response many expected, but it was one that altered the energy of the room. For Jasmine, the choice to emphasize accountability, respect, and responsibility wasn't just about countering Karoline's remark. It was about demonstrating in real time what those values look like in practice. By not lashing out, she modeled accountability to her constituents. By speaking calmly, she showed respect even in disagreement. And by grounding her words in the bigger picture, she highlighted responsibility as the cornerstone of leadership. It was a performance not of aggression, but of principle. Her supporters later praised the reply as a moment of clarity, saying she had taken an attempt to silence her and transformed it into an opportunity to remind the nation of what matters in politics. Critics, too, had to admit that her words carried a resonance that was difficult to ignore. They might have disagreed with her perspective, but they couldn't dismiss the way she turned a heated confrontation into a message about values. By mentioning him in her framing, she underscored the point that accountability is not selective. Whether one is a freshman lawmaker or the most powerful figure in the country, the expectation of responsibility is the same. That statement alone rippled beyond the chamber. As commentators picked up on the subtle but deliberate way she tied the moment to a larger conversation about leadership and public trust. What Jasmine accomplished in that exchange was more than just a defense of herself. She redirected the lens through which the conversation was being viewed. Instead of focusing solely on Karoline's sharp declaration, the discussion moved to questions about what leaders owe the people they serve. By doing so, she made the moment less about personal rivalry and more about the standard to which all leaders, including him, should be held. In the aftermath of the exchange, the air inside the chamber remained heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. Karoline Leavitt's declaration had set the stage, and Jasmine Crokett's measured reply had altered it. But it was what came after the ripple effect that revealed just how significant the moment had become. What might have been remembered as a fleeting clash between two public figures quickly evolved into a national conversation. People weren't just talking about what was said. They were talking about what it meant, and what it revealed about the way political debates unfold in the modern age. Across news outlets and social media platforms, clips of the exchange were replayed endlessly. Some commentators praised Karoline's boldness, saying her sharp words embodied strength and conviction. Others admired Jasmine's composure, pointing out how her calm response demonstrated the kind of discipline expected from those in positions of authority. The debate over who won was less important than the fact that the exchange itself had struck a chord with the public. Everyone seemed to take a side, and the discussion spread far beyond the walls of the chamber. The most striking part of the aftermath was how people fixated on the contrast in tone. Karoline's remark was seen as a declaration of finality, a line drawn in the sand. Jasmine's response, however, reframed the conversation into something larger, something more enduring. Viewers began to question not just the arguments being made, but the way they were being delivered. In a political climate often dominated by shouting matches and viral soundbites, here was a moment where tone and demeanor carried as much weight as the content of the debate itself. The effect wasn't confined to television studios or online chatter. Within political circles, both allies and critics dissected the exchange. Some strategists pointed out that Jasmine had managed to take control without appearing combative, a skill that could serve her well in future debates. Others suggested that Karoline's bluntness, while polarizing, energized her base and reinforced her reputation for speaking without hesitation. Both women had left an imprint, but it was Jasmine's calm reply that many believed had shifted the dynamic of the discussion in a way no one had anticipated. The national conversation also touched on something deeper: the responsibility of leadership. When Jasmine mentioned him in her framing, she reminded the nation that accountability extends to every level of power. This mention was not lost on viewers, who quickly connected the dots between the chamber debate and the broader expectations of leadership at the very top. Commentators seized on that point, noting how a single reference had turned a sharp exchange between two figures into a moment that reached all the way to the presidency. By tying her response to him, Jasmine emphasized that the issues at stake weren't confined to partisan skirmishes. They were about the fundamental standards of governance, in households across the country. The conversation spilled over into dinner tables and community gatherings. Some people debated whether Karoline's words were justified, while others applauded Jasmine's ability to remain composed under pressure. Teachers used the moment in classrooms as an example of rhetoric, pointing out the contrast between confrontation and composure. Community leaders cited it in discussions about civility, arguing that the way disagreements are handled can shape public trust in government. Even those who were not deeply engaged in politics found themselves drawn to the story. The clip was simple enough to understand without background knowledge. One person declared "You're finished," and the other responded with a calm, unexpected answer. Yet the implications stretched far wider. It highlighted how quickly a single moment could dominate the national conversation, not just because of what was said, but because of how it was said. For him, the mention carried a symbolic weight. It served as a reminder that leadership is always under the microscope, that words and actions are constantly evaluated by the public. It tied the local moment of confrontation to the broader national narrative, making clear that the principles of accountability and responsibility are not limited to one chamber or one debate. They apply universally, regardless of position. The aftermath demonstrated that the nation is not only hungry for answers, but also deeply attuned to the style in which those answers are delivered. The debate between Karoline and Jasmine became more than a clash of personalities. It became a lens through which people considered the health of political discourse itself. By the time the dust settled, it was clear that the exchange had left a lasting impression, sparking conversations about tone, leadership, and the expectations placed on those who serve, including him. As the dust settled around the exchange between Karoline Leavitt and Jasmine Crokett, what remained was not simply a memory of sharp words or clever rebuttals. It was the recognition that moments like these reveal far more than political rivalry. They expose the deeper questions about how leadership is carried out in front of the nation. The encounter demonstrated that politics is not only about policy but also about tone, presence, and the choices leaders make under pressure. Karoline's firm declaration, "You're finished," was not just a statement. It was a demonstration of conviction. Her words reflected a brand of leadership that thrives on directness, drawing strength from clarity and finality. To many of her supporters, this was a display of courage, the refusal to mince words or dilute a stance for the sake of appearances. They saw her as embodying the kind of boldness they believe is often missing in public life. For others, though, it was a reminder of how easily politics can slip into confrontation rather than constructive debate. Jasmine's response offered a striking counterpoint. She chose not to rise in anger, but instead to ground her words in accountability, respect, and responsibility. By doing so, she redirected the focus of the discussion away from personalities and toward principles. Her calmness didn't diminish her strength, it enhanced it. In that moment, she embodied a style of leadership that recognizes the power of restraint, the importance of listening, and the value of elevating a conversation rather than dragging it deeper into conflict. What made the moment truly resonate was how it touched on universal expectations of leadership. When Jasmine invoked the idea of accountability and linked it, even briefly, to him, she made the point that responsibility is not selective. It applies at every level, whether one is a representative, a challenger, or the most powerful figure in the nation. That single reference expanded the scope of the debate, reminding everyone watching that politics is never just about the two people on stage. It is about the trust of the people who are watching, listening, and judging. The aftermath confirmed the significance of the exchange. The clips were replayed, the quotes analyzed, and the reactions divided. But underneath the commentary, there was a shared recognition that something important had unfolded. People were reminded that political discourse does not have to rely on shouting matches alone. Tone and approach can matter just as much, if not more, than the words themselves. In the end, the encounter between Karoline and Jasmine will be remembered not only for what was said, but for what it revealed. It highlighted two very different approaches to leadership, one rooted in bold confrontation, the other in calm redirection. It showed the nation that words have power, but so do silence, composure, and timing. And it underscored that in a time when every phrase can echo across the country within seconds, how leaders choose to speak